Hello friends, this is Odds, it's one of those timelines, and today we're back with the latest killer tier list where we're gonna rank all of the killers in Dead by Daylight from top to bottom based on their relative ability to secure kills and win games. Now, mind you, the killers at the top are not unbeatable, and the killers at the bottom are not bad, it's just how they rank up to each other. And this is concerning the next 6.2 update that we've barely tried in the PTB a little bit. So we are taking some educated guesses here as to how the game will look and where the killers will stand when this next update drops in just a few days now. And this is my best approximation. Now, some people make tier lists based on tournament performance. Some people make tier lists based on theoretical, no add-on performance. I like mine to be a bit more realistic and to give you a better idea of what it's like to play and play against these killers. So in my tier list, we're assuming that you play on all the maps, that you use a mixture of all of the best add-ons on each killer across all rarities, and that you play against average high MMR survivors, which is sometimes survivor friends, sometimes solo, sometimes something in between. So assuming an average of all of that, this is my best approximation as to what the tier list looks like. Now, you might look at this tier list and find some of these placements to be in conflict with your own experience, and that's fine. Some of them are very, very difficult or very, very close to each other. For example, some killers are very limited by their bad add-ons. Pyramid Head, Nemesis, and Freddy are great examples. These killers are strong, but their add-ons are very weak compared to some of their peers, so they don't go any higher than that. On the flip side, we also have killers that are carried by one or some add-ons that are so strong that with these add-ons, they really elevate themselves and wouldn't be quite as high without. There's also many killers that have a bit of a threshold that you need to reach. And if this threshold is met, they can snowball really hard and create pressure out of nowhere. And they can have very oppressive games and feel much, much higher than I place them on this tier list. For example, Twins, Hag, and Pinhead all can be extremely devastating if the survivors fail to play against them correctly. But they also can feel weak if certain items and strategies are employed against them. So some of these killers are a bit of all or nothing, and they can sometimes feel higher than this, and they can oftentimes also feel lower than this. And then obviously there's Wesker. Wesker in the PTB had very janky collision. Some of his values could be a little bit more generous. And he also was basically unable to hit survivors during vault animations. I'm assuming that all of these things are going to be changed. I'm assuming that his collisions will be better, which we've seen before with Blight. I'm assuming that they will probably change some of his base kit numbers to make him a bit more forgiving. And I'm also assuming that he'll be able to actually injure people during vaults, which is something that I think will very reasonably happen. Assuming all of that, he is right here on the A tier. If none of these things happen, just as we played him on the PTB with his slight jankiness, I would drop him down to B tier very significantly. But assuming that some of these things happen or all of these things happen, then I think Wesker is more or less well placed in this tier list. Now, unlike other tier lists that I've done in the past, where I try to talk about every killer about the same amount of time, this time I'm not going to do that. I will be talking about the killers that are easy to place faster, and the killers that have a bit more meat to dissect will actually spend more time on them. And right off the bat, the best killer in the game is the Nurse. Yep, the Nurse has been and will probably forever be the strongest killer in Dead by Daylight. As we all know, she breaks the conventional chase mechanics of the game, ignoring windows and pallets for the most part. Even if you were to stun her with a pallet, she no longer has a double stun, which is really good for her. She introduces her own mechanics, yes, but these are heavily tilted in her favor. Even though her range add-ons were nerfed, she no longer gains teleporting speed from them. She still has very good add-ons across the board, and some of the more powerful ones are still very destructive. She also benefits from the generic killer buffs that all killers got in a previous update: longer generator times, shorter speed boost from survivors, faster ability to kick gens and stuff like that, all benefit her. She has crazy synergies with instant-down perks like Starstruck, and some perks like Awaken Awareness, which is coming from Wesker, probably will get nerfed or can be buffed because they are too strong on Nurse and Nurse alone. And she's also pretty adaptable to almost any map, where verticality doesn't matter, fences don't really matter, it's all just about visibility, and she can do well almost anywhere. When you consider all of that, and you also consider the fact that she's now even easier to play than before, yeah, she's very strong. Why is she easier to play than before, you might ask? Well, they've changed a few bugs that were part of her and changed a few features that make Nurse now even more oppressive than some patches ago. She recovers her blinks during certain stun animations. She also doesn't need to precisely press the attack button after blinking. In the past, if you attack too early, you wouldn't attack and it would be lost. And if you attack too late, you would give survivors more time to react. Now you can actually attack as you're teleporting and it will come out on the first frame perfectly, very fast every time. That's why you sometimes get insta-hit when a Nurse teleports on you. Very, very, very good place to be for Nurse, for sure. Moving on, we have the Blight, who is not quite as oppressive as Nurse and does abide a bit more by the rules that other killers have to follow, but make no mistake, he is disgusting. His base kit is really powerful, he has mobility, he has ability to hit survivors in the open and around many structures, and also has the ability to break pallets relatively fast. Obviously, this synergizes extremely well with most slowdown perks, with most info perks. All of that goes really well on him. And on top of that, he also has an incredible assortment of add-ons, perhaps the best add-ons in the game. Add-ons to insta-down, you have them. Add-ons to immediately recharge and keep your mobility and downing up, you have them. Add-ons to increase the speed, which is very easy for you to adapt to and very difficult for the survivors to react to, are there. And a bunch of other add-ons that are just overall pretty disgusting, like the ability to basically insta-break pallets while slowing down survivors in a single add-on. An unpredictable beast of a killer that can do well in almost every map and has good resources for maps that are the worst for him, that routinely slaps good survivors even in tournament settings. The Blight is really, really disgusting. Certainly harder to play than Nurse, and certainly can feel less oppressive because he does have to follow some rules, but make no mistake, the Blight is probably also very, very solid and won't be going anywhere in terms of his second placement in the tier list. Perhaps more controversial placement is the Spirit, which I've now downgraded to the next tier. Now, the Spirit, make no mistake, she has been very strong for a long time. She did get some nerfs back in the day that made her a bit more easy for survivors to deal with. And some recent developments have changed her up and down. In her favor is the fact that Iron Will is no longer as strong of a perk. Iron Will made injured survivors completely quiet. Now it doesn't anymore, and it doesn't work if they're exhausted. So that perk has fallen from grace. Since you don't have many Iron Wills, almost any survivor, healthy or injured, makes some kind of noise that is easy to track for you and very difficult for them to hide. But you have to remember that even though Iron Will is gone, a lot of other perks have come. And medkits now are more popular than ever. Survivors realize how bad self-care is. Now they nerfed it, and now they bring self-care less and medkits more, which hurts you. And a bunch of other perks that also hurt the Spirit, since she can be in multiple places at once or as quickly as some of the other killers. Off the Record is a perk that makes survivors silent, just like Iron Will, when they're off the hook. And he also gives them a second health state if you decide to tunnel them. So that is a little bit harder for Spirit to do compared to Nurse. Perks that allow survivors to group up and do gens fast, like Prove Thyself, are also really, really strong, since Spirit doesn't use info perks, auto reading, and regression quite as good as she used to. And you also have people running Adrenaline, Circle of Healing, all these strong healing perks that are very decent against Spirit if she fails to get some good chases in. Luckily for you, she's very good in chase. With her best add-ons, she is definitely not very far from the other two. With average add-ons, she is still surprisingly powerful. I've played against survivors that are convinced that I have very strong add-ons and I'm only running yellows and browns. So across the board, her add-ons are still very ridiculous, even despite the nerf. So she's quite strong, but not quite as capable of dominating survivors in unfavorable conditions as the other killers. Next up, perhaps a surprising pick is Artis. Now, Artis is a really complex killer, and playing against an average Artis is not going to make you feel like she's particularly strong. But watch one of the stronger Artis players, and you'll see exactly what we're talking about. An Artis, from the very beginning of the match, can begin to scout survivors and find them really quickly. Once she is in chase, a really good Artis will lock you down in ways that are extremely oppressive, and a chase against the Artis, if she is good, unless you have some of the best maps in the game, will not last very long. So she's very good in the 1v1, and with certain add-ons, she's extremely oppressive in the 1v1. And then once that happens, good artists will both manage the survivors that are remaining and use perk synergies to their fullest advantage. You can use Deadman Switch along or by itself along with with Pain Resonance or by itself, to block gens across the map without you having to be there. You can camp out of basement and directly injure with birds and be really, really difficult to deal with as a defensive killer, while simultaneously using perks like Merciless Storm, Deadlock, and so on to passively slow down gens across the board and interrupt people that are healing across the board, and do all of these really disgusting multitasking to keep survivors busy. Needless to say, a group that is not well prepared or well coordinated will fall to you very quickly. And a group that is really, really strong could potentially defeat you, but not without a lot of resistance. Her add-ons are surprisingly good sometimes, especially the low rarity ones, give a lot of bang for the buck, but nowhere near as game-changing as the 3 previous killers. So she is in a bit more of a balanced state. Play against a good artist or get really good at her, however, and you will see exactly what makes her this powerful. It's mostly the fact that her 1v1 can be very powerful, that her perk synergies to regress, block, and harass people out of gens are among the highest of the game, and also the fact that she has a few perks, add-ons, and strategies and cheeky plays that she can do to get survivors off guard, sometimes get free downs or free hits in unexpected places. That's, in my opinion, where the artist stands right now. Next up is the Plague. Now, unlike some of the previous killers, the Plague has the unfortunate downside of having RNG built into her kit. By default, when the Plague spawns in the map, she has 6 fountains around the map, and one of them, more with add-ons, will be white. You will be able to drink from it and get your very powerful Corrupt Purge. Until then, you have the Vile Purge, which is a power to infect survivors and items to eventually make them broken and infected, which they cannot heal from. So the Plague naturally counters Circle of Healing and most medkits, and that is an amazing thing to have. Other killers dream of having this ability. Being able to almost nullify entire items and add-ons that are otherwise really powerful is an amazing perk that the Plague comes with. So that part about her is great. Typically, what will happen is you'll use your best add-ons to ensure that they stay injured and it's really powerful for you, or that you get your Corrupt Purge, which is an extremely oppressive chasing tool in most scenarios. So, where does the unfortunate news come in? Sometimes your fountains can spawn in really bad places. Sometimes the jankiness of her puke can be a bit annoying. You can puke on survivors and you will hit them on your screen, but the server will detect that they were not infected. So a little bit of that randomness does hurt the Plague, makes her a little bit less consistent than the killers above. But make no mistake, she's still really powerful. Her add-ons are good across the board, and the highest rarity ones can be disgusting. Being able to get 5 additional instances of your red puke with an iridescent is disgusting. The information from the black instance is disgusting. Many add-ons where if you were to play them with the right builds, the Plague would be nearly unbeatable. And there's also the whole playstyle of infecting generators with supporting add-ons to make it very difficult for survivors to do anything. And the 90-second longer generators means that this is even harder for survivors to play against. So all of the generic killer buffs, for the most part, are really good on Plague. She has an assortment of builds that are still very destructive, even though Ruin nerf hurts her a little bit. So yeah, Plague is really, really good. And when you understand how to use her add-on especially, she becomes a bit of a threat. Don't forget that once she has her red puke, survivors in the open are basically dead. Unhooking is almost impossible. So even though she doesn't need to camp, she can camp very effectively if survivors don't play well. And there's just not that much a survivor can do in Chase if the map is good enough for Plague and she's tall enough to shoot over most loops. So yeah, when you consider all of that, I really do think Plague is the 5th best killer in the game. Next up, we move to the Oni. Now, the Oni has a much harder early game than any of the previous killers. He is a normal killer at the start that has to abide by all the rules, that has no special power in reality to hit survivors. But what happens once you hit them and once you have gotten a little bit of blood flowing? He becomes a monster. He has mobility, he has insta-down, he has ability to break down pallets and walls relatively quick. And all of those things make him a very explosive all-or-nothing type killer. On top of this, however, the thing that really elevates him and makes him a contender for one of the best killers in the game It's not just what I described, it's the fact that his add-ons are really good, somewhat unpredictable for survivors to deal with, and his skill ceiling is insanely high. Now, the things that you can do with Oni once you get his power are mind-blowing. From flicks that exceed the normal 90 degrees, from tricks to get yourself stuck, from key presses in certain orders to delay your speed. All of the things that you can do with Oni are genuinely impressive and super oppressive for the survivors if they don't know how to play, or even if they do know how to play against them. So a really good Oni with a good use of their power can down almost anyone, almost anywhere. And it only takes one person in your team making a small mistake, giving him a little bit more blood, for this to become really apparent. Now, the meta of taking hits for your teammates and having multiple health states, off the record, all of these things does hurt him a little bit. Multiple medkits, adrenalines, and all do hurt him, but not quite as bad as other killers that need to hit survivors repeatedly multiple times. If you hit a survivor and they resist it with off the record, that will be a survivor that will be dropping blood for the foreseeable future. So that's always good for you. Overall, if you consider his very high skill cap, and you consider the fact that in most maps, getting that first hit is not that insanely difficult and survivors will eventually give in, Oni does really well. Even in tournaments where survivors play perfectly and don't give him his power for 2, 3, 4 gens, Onis oftentimes win just based on getting their power once or twice and making a good enough play. So yeah, all of those things considered, Oni's definitely in a very strong place. Next up, we move on to Pyramid Head, aka the Executioner. Now, the Executioner is a beast of many contrasts. He's a basic killer with normal basic attacks, and on top of that, he has the power to leave trails on the ground and shoot projectile-like range attacks that can hit multiple survivors. As of the latest updates, what are some of the happenings? Survivors have base kit BT. This is both good and bad for him. It's good because when they come out of a cage, they don't have a base kit endurance. This means that if someone gets rescued in a cage, you can tunnel them immediately and down them immediately, which is something that you can no longer do at hooks anymore with any killer. In the past, Pyramid Head could even down 2 survivors during a hook. If they didn't have borrowed time, you could hit them with your power and down them both potentially, which was disgusting. But that's something that you can no longer do since survivors now can no longer get hit after an unhook because they have a base kit endurance of 5 seconds, right? Which might even be higher, you never know. But the point is, he's no longer as good as tunneling out of hooks, but he is very good at tunneling out of cages, and in small maps or controlled environments, this can be the downfall of a team. A survivor getting tunneled early with 90-second generators is disgusting. Perks like Reassurance, which is coming, do not help against cages. Kinship, funnily enough, does, but for the most part, it's very difficult to prevent tunneling from happening. So if this killer tunnels someone properly using their power, that can make any team in any map lose a match very fast. On top of that, he has a very solid 1v1 where almost any loop in the game is dangerous to be against him. He does have a bit of guessing involved, but the better Pyramid Head players know how to minimize this and how to waste the least amount of time possible. Some very good Pyramid Heads have also learned how to flick and do turns that are very unnatural and survivors don't quite react to. And that is definitely a high skill thing. And most really good Pyramid Heads also use range add-ons to get hits in places and angles that survivors don't always expect. So that's great. Unfortunately, unlike most of our previous killers, his add-ons are extremely predictable. There's 1 or 2 that you gotta look out for and nothing else. His add-ons are very bad. So whereas Spirit with her best add-ons is really scary compared to a normal Spirit, Pyramid Head barely changes with or without add-ons. So this is perhaps the most limiting factor in the game right now. If you fail to cage survivors and you have to play by hooking rules, then Pyramid Head can still be very frustrating. And this all or nothingness of him is maybe what keeps him a bit more restrained compared to other killers. We then move on to Wesker, and Wesker has a lot of things going for him. He has a 40-meter terror radius, which is very unusual and typically a bad thing, but in this meta of perks that inflict themselves through terror radius, like Chorophobia and so on, that is actually a bit of an asset. He can use Infectious Fright and other Terror Radius related perks more effectively perhaps than any other killer in the game, which is awesome. His power also passively infects survivors, which makes them slower, very underrated thing. And if it fully procs, it makes them even slower and makes them vulnerable to an insta-down from his power. So his power induces survivors to make mistakes and forces them, if they want to avoid this, to waste a bit of time with the first aid sprays. While they do first aid sprays, well, mistakes can happen. His add-ons to reveal them and slow them down come into play. And all of this is a really nice background thing to be going on while he uses his main power, which is the Virulent Bound. It's an ability that's not exactly unlike the Blight, where he moves very fast. In fact, it's a combination of Nurse, which is like 2 blinks, and Demogorgon, which is like a big dash. So he has 2 dashes that he can connect. And these dashes can grab survivors, throw them into obstacles to damage them. And they are very consistent at damaging survivors. The only thing about them right now is that their collision in the PTB was really bad. But if the collision gets fixed the same way the Blight's got fixed, and if his power and speed overall gets buffed a little bit, which I'm sure it will, and if he can damage survivor during vaulting animations, which he cannot do right now, then we have a killer that will have Terror Radius synergies, ability to break pallets really fast with one of his best add-ons, passive slowdown and even occasional insta-down, ability to immediately injure 2 survivors during unhooks and trigger borrowed time, which is a big counter to Off the Record. Say that Dwight unhooks Claudette and you grab Dwight and smack him into Claudette. Now that Claudette no longer has 2 health states. So once you hook Dwight, one way or another, you can now go for Claudette, and if she had Off the Record, she only takes 1 hit to go down, not 2. Big deal, actually. When you consider all of that, he's still limited by the fact that his power cannot curve around some small obstacles. So he's not the most oppressive killer in the game, and even normal survivors will occasionally get freebies if he grabs you and doesn't bump you into anything. So he doesn't have a power that strikes me as extremely oppressive, but it does have a little bit of everything, a little bit of mobility, the synergy that we mentioned, some decent add-ons that will probably keep him a little bit unpredictable, especially the ones that make your RB revealed. Then we also have the add-ons to start infected. Definitely a lot of potential there. And he does strike me as a killer that belongs around this place in the tier list, though perhaps he's the most volatile of them all. This is all under some heavy assumptions. So by all means, feel free to check when the patch comes out and see if I hit the mark or not. Next up, we move on to Huntress. Now, Huntress is an extremely destructive killer who can go through health states extremely fast. Especially with cooldown add-ons, she can throw hatchets and damage survivors much faster than a normal killer can doing normal attacks. And this means that anytime multiple survivors are exposed and in the open against Huntress, she can create horrible situations for them, especially if they are coming out of basement or if they are cornered somewhere. So Huntress, very good at punishing survivor mistakes, very good at handling unhooks and shedding through health states, which is a big deal. The fact that survivors get less speed from a hit than before is pretty good for her. The fact that she can break pallets a little bit faster than before is also pretty good for her. Overall, the slower gens are nice. Some of her stronger perks are now a little bit harder to use because they got nerfed, but she still has decent alternatives in the current state of meta perks. So in that regard, she's fine. Unfortunately, she doesn't have quite as many synergies as other killers do with stealth. She cannot use stealth because her lullaby is always there, pretty much. She cannot use insta-down because she mostly relies on her hatchets, so she's a little bit more predictable in that regard than other killers, and her synergies are a bit more limited, but she's still very, very strong. Her add-ons across the board are extremely decent, and some of them potentially very, very scary. And perhaps her biggest downfall is the fact that she is slower than most. It gives herself away, is easy to see in the open, and very difficult for her to actually damage survivors if they pay attention and run early to save structures where her speed is a bit of an issue. You need to play Huntress very, very accurately and mind every one of your steps if you want her to actually shine and know which chases are worth taking and which ones should be just left alone in favor of someone else in a worse spot. When you consider all of that and you play her at a very high level, she's great. A bit map dependent. Unfortunately, locker spawns have become better since the Dredge update, but can still be painful. And the RNG sometimes does play an unfortunate part, but for the most part, she's really, really strong. Her add-ons are across the board good. It just comes down to the fact that sometimes the maps are just not in your favor. Many of them are difficult for you to navigate effectively, and that's about it. And next up is the Hag, a killer that has changed remarkably little over the past few tier lists, but that has seen the game around her change very significantly, and mostly to her detriment. Now, the Hag is not very good at chasing survivors at the start of the match. Typically, she gives up space and even generators to set up a web of traps, a perimeter. And if survivors get injured in this perimeter, you typically try to push them further into it until you down them, you hook them, and now you have something to defend and an area to control. And once you are entrenched in this situation, survivors have to play really well. In the past, most teams were unable to handle this, and they would either make a mistake and give you health states or even downs and lose the game on the spot, or slowly lose their items, their health states, and put themselves in a position where they have no chance to win the battle of attrition. But in the current and next patch, all of this is changing. The meta shakeup has, for the most part, hurt the Hag. Survivors now run more team perks, like Prove Thyself, which are very effective against her. It used to be that if you had 4 survivors with Iron Will, you didn't really care. Those were 4 wasted perks, but these perks are not quite what you see now. You see perks like Adrenaline, you see perks like Prove Thyself, perks like Deliverance or Reassurance, which make camping very, very difficult. And most importantly, you see perks to take extra health states. Most importantly, off the record, a survivor that gets rescued can realistically run for 80 seconds around the entire map, trigger all of your traps, and you will never be able to hit them and go around it. There's no answer for you to do this. In the past, unhooking against Hag was also very dangerous and risky. The person that was unhooked was vulnerable if there was no borrowed time, and the person that unhooked was presumably healthy but could also take a hit. Now, with base kit borrowed time, any team, even if they have no perks, can unhook, and the person that is unhooked has 5 seconds to run all over your traps or take hits for the person that unhooked them, and there's very little you can do about this. So the unhooking scenarios used to be, oh, maybe I don't have borrowed time, to now I 100% have borrowed time. And this hurts the Hag's time economy. You no longer can put a trap that reliably slows down survivors because sometimes they can just barge right through and not really care. On top of that, the inclusion of boons, the more higher presence of medkits, the fact that you now have more sprint bursts, all of these things make getting your first down very difficult. If you go to a big map where you cannot realistically cover the whole of it, or even a big part of it, and survivors find you early, or they are particularly lucky with their perks and items, getting that first down to have something to defend can be very difficult. And in these matches, Hag can go on for a very long time, achieving very little. Even in matches where everything goes well, you do depend on a high degree to snowball. You can be playing a really good game of Hag, lose 3 generators, and have 2 hooks and nothing else. You are just one bad deliverance or one bad reassurance. You're just one unlucky usage of a perk from the survivors away from losing everything if you don't begin to down survivors and catch them really, really well. When you consider all of those things and the fact that some of her best perks are now harder to use or have been nerfed slightly, yeah, I do think Hag is still great, still strong, but has more counterplay, and the counterplay to her is more common and pervasive than it was before. So all of that consider that we still have very big maps that are hard to trap and create perimeters effectively. Yeah, I would say Hag is a little bit weaker. Still though, a force to be reckoned with, and you need to play her in a very specific way at a very high level if you want to see results, but it's definitely deadly still. And moving on, we make our way to the twins. Now, the twins are a bit of an all or nothing character. When you go against teams that are uncoordinated, that don't heal each other very well, and don't have enough methods to heal themselves with boons and medkits, or even enough perks to bounce back from difficult situations, second chance perks like Unbreakable and so on. When you go against these teams, you will destroy them. You will get them injured quickly with Charlotte after some smart mind games, then you'll pick them off one by one with Victor, and this can feel very oppressive. Even in tournaments with very good survivors that are very highly coordinated, twins can do extreme damage because they are limited and they typically are only allowed to bring one medkit and sometimes no boons. But in real games, survivors don't have any respect for any made-up rules. They will bring 3 medkits, they will bring 1 boon on top of that, they will have second chance perks like Dead Hard, that could allow them to tank a hit by Victor and then kick you, like Off the Record, that could allow them to tank a hit, kick you, and protect someone else. All of these things, when you consider them, can make Twins games very, very difficult. At the start of the game, you can choose to either hit survivors with Charlotte, which is difficult because she's a normal M1 killer, and then try to send Victor to down them. If they give you free hits, awesome. If they don't, it's tough. Or you can try to send out Victor, which is basically unavoidable for survivors, and then injure someone. The problem is that survivors that are smart will typically take Victor and then just hold him hostage for about 30 seconds before you can claim him back. And this will force you for that duration to not be able to use Victor and just be a normal killer. This is the problem with the Twins. If survivors have methods to do this and heal themselves quickly, it is very difficult to breach this wall as Twins. You need to play very well, you need to use your perks really well, and some of the relatively strong add-ons that Twins have really well if you want to get them injured, keep them injured, and then have Victor be a real threat. If you somehow manage to do this, either with Force Penance, Franklins, Spinning Top, ways to make them drop their items, Shattered Hope to maybe counter boons, which is a thing that you can do right now. If you somehow manage to overcome these healing and second chancey instances, or if they didn't have anything in the first place, Twins is really, really powerful. A killer with a very high skill ceiling that requires survivors almost by definition to use teamwork, which is something that not all survivors really know or want to do, is powerful. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is about Twins. Unfortunately, the changes to survivor, to the generic killer buffs don't benefit them a lot. Perks like Deliverance, Prove Thyself, all the perks that survivors bring right now are very powerful against Twins, so the meta shakeup doesn't benefit them quite as much as some other killers, but they are overall in a decent spot. Next up, we move on down a tier to Pinhead, who is arguably the strongest M1 basic style killer. He is a killer that has in the past been in the top of the killer tier, in the top of the kill rates charts because of his slowdown that survivors couldn't handle very well at most levels. But he also received a nerf to some of his strongest add-ons. So all in all, what we have right now is a pretty decent killer that is pretty balanced and has potential to be decent and has potential to be very, very powerful, depending on how well you play around the box mechanic. So let's talk about the box real quick. The box is an item that spawns around the map. Typically, survivors see it and the killer cannot see it, so although some add-ons can change this. And survivors have to try to solve it when the killer is away or busy. And if they solve it successfully, then they delay it and nothing happens. If the killer, however, interrupts it by attacking or using chains, then the cube keeps acting up and produces chains that harass survivors and make healing and doing gens very slow, if not impossible. And if you retrieve the cube yourself by finding it, which is something that you can get better at, understanding the logic and using certain perks, or by taking it away from a survivor, then the cube is reset and this happens again. So a bad Pinhead will play around the map, not use his power very well. The cube will be picked up, he will ignore it, or he will teleport, which does nothing, and then he will waste time and he will lose. A good Pinhead, however, will keep in mind where everyone spawned and where everyone is at any given time to try to guess where the cube will be, which has some logic to it. He will either pick up the cube himself or harass it out of survivors' hands, which is increasingly possible with some perks and add-ons. And then this cube will constantly be reset to the point where survivors can do nothing at all. And it takes a really good team to organize this cube solving to counter this. So when you look at how high of a potential the cube has to keep survivors down, it is really, really incredible. Then again, sometimes you will find one survivor, and while you have to carry him, the other guy will do the cube, and there's nothing you can do. So if you're very, very good, you have a semi-consistent way to slow down survivors, but it's not 100% reliable, mind you. And then, of course, comes his Possessed Chain, which is his anti-loop power. Very frustrating. When you start playing, you see your chains hit survivors and do absolutely nothing. When you become better at it, you will be more precise in your chains. You will know the angles to use to make them strong. Overall, one of the more balanced, decent chase powers in the game, believe it or not, that can allow you to do a lot of things like interrupt people from doing totems and so on. So the chains are decent. They are decent, but they still have a bit of RNG and they still get countered by certain perks like self-aware. So they are hardly the best chasing power in the world. Well, you consider all of it and you consider some of his add-ons that are pretty strong. I think he's in a really good place. Some of the notable add-ons worth talking about are the Engineer's Fang. This nerfs the chains a lot when survivors are injured, but it also makes you injure survivors if you hit them with a chain and they're healthy. If a Pinhead main managed to practice this add-on for very many hours and got really good at it, he would be one of the scariest killers to go against, for sure. There's a few other add-ons that are really powerful. Another very notable one is the Original Pain. The Original Pain has the ability to inflict deep wound on survivors almost immediately if they're injured. And this means that with this add-on, you can completely counter other endurance status effects. So that means that Dead Hard doesn't work. The base kit endurance, the base kit borrowed time doesn't work. Off the record doesn't work. And all of these things just straight up don't work. So you have an add-on on a killer that is already decent to counter all of these things. That is very, very significant. And the fact that survivors have to drop their own items to pick up the cube sometimes does mean that they are less effective at using medkits and so on. So when you consider all of that, he is a very, very decent, strong, skill-intensive killer whose only downsides are sometimes bad RNG with the cube, sometimes bad RNG with chains, and sometimes survivors being in a map that is so disgustingly powerful that his own inability to insta-down and teleport like other killers means that he's just not quite capable to catch up. But he's otherwise a very decent killer that I highly recommend you play. Next up is the Cannibal. Now, the Cannibal really plays differently depending on the skill level. The Cannibal is a killer that is extremely good at camping. He can sit by a hook and just use his chainsaw or threaten to use his chainsaw and no one can do much about it. So he's very good at securing kills, but don't forget, this is a playstyle that is not going to necessarily get you wins, especially in the next update. In the next update, survivors will have kinship, they'll have reassurance, they'll have a lot of methods to maybe die on hook, yes, but die on hook after a very long time, which means that you as a killer will not want to camp as your plan A. When you play against a Cannibal that doesn't use add-ons, that plays like this killer is honestly way below average and is nowhere near as powerful as B tier would suggest. The problem, of course, or the saving grace, of course, comes from the fact that that's not all he can do. He's good at that, yes, but that's not all he can do. He can do a lot more than that. The Cannibal is a basic killer with a chainsaw on top that can break through pallets and walls quickly, that can down multiple survivors if they're in the open, so body blocking against him is highly ineffective. With some of his best add-ons, his chainsaw actually gives him a very significant distance, and even speed, which he can use in small loops. So highly skilled Cannibals with the best add-ons are on a completely different level than a normal Cannibal. You will often see people bring Bamboozle so that they can play around windows. And once you do this, many pallets are either almost instant breaks or even instant downs. I've played against good Cannibals that use the better add-ons, the Engravens and Chilies, in a way that I know how it works and I still can do nothing about. So this very obviously chews through bad survivors, decent survivors, and even good survivors that make mistakes sometimes. So his ability to insta-down and immediately punish mistakes in the open like that is really, really good. Now, unfortunately, sometimes you will play in maps where survivors can split up, and now you don't have a lot of perks to help you deal with gens passively. So if you chase a survivor in one corner, there is very little you can do as Cannibal, unlike some other killers, to also passively slow down or threaten the other survivors across the map. So survivors splitting up and taking advantage of windows and taking advantage of millions of pallets lined up and taking advantage of strong maps will make a Cannibal be challenged quite significantly, and you'll need to be smarter and know which battles to pick and which ones not to. So yeah, overall, lack of mobility, lack of passive information are a down, but his chase is decent. His potential to punish mistakes is great, and his add-ons, his best add-ons, elevate him significantly if you really know what you're doing with him. And that's it for the Cannibal. Now, next up, we have the Demogorgon, who is arguably one of the better balanced killers around the roster. Has a little bit of mobility, has a little bit of information collection, has a little bit of pallet break and wall break, and has a decent chase and hitting power. He has a little bit of everything. He's a jack of all trades, master of none. He's probably not the best at anything in particular, but he is pretty good all around. Unfortunately for him, some of the lower end add-ons are some of his best, and some of the higher end add-ons are actually really scary. The change to generic killer buffs that has slowed down gens, that has changed the meta a little bit, for the most part sits really well on him. In fact, Save the Best for Last is now an amazing perk on him, even more amazing than before, that is great at stomping average teams. The smarter teams make it a little bit more challenging for Demogorgon. They do try to run you on places where your power is hard to use. You will eat some dead hearts. We're trying to shred people at windows and so on. So he is a bit of a killer that needs to mine the survivor meta perks because they can hurt him. He is a killer that you can body block against. He is a killer that you can heal against very quickly. He is a killer that will suffer if he leaves gens uncontested and prove that self happens. So he does get hit a little bit by the strong perks and needs to look around for them. But then again, he does have some things that, if you consider him at his maximum potential, they are scary. He can use hails for mobility. There are some places in maps where he can actually slide for hits that are unexpected, which can catch many survivors off guard. He has decent synergy with many perks, not all of which are obvious. Some of his stronger add-ons allow him to defend totems. Devour Hope, Undying, with Guard Life, Whistle, and stuff like that come to mind. He also has an add-on that is absolutely disgusting called the Leprous Lichen that allows him to emerge from a portal and see everyone everywhere on the map. And this amount of information is almost unprecedented in any other killer. Being able to, for free, see everyone everywhere is huge on command. So when you consider all of his best add-ons, you consider the skill ceiling using his power and everything else, he's an average killer that spikes in potential here and there. If the map that you're given and the survivors that you play against are not completely one-sided, you have a very good chance to beating most teams. And that's it for Demo. And next up is the Deathslinger, a killer that by now is probably dizzy because he has bounced up and down several times in the killer tier list over the years. Now, on release, the Deathslinger had a 24-meter terror radius, which could be tiny and very hard to hear with monitoring abuse, which made him almost a stealth killer. And he also could almost instantly shoot and spear a survivor, which made it really difficult for them to react to and dodge mid-chase. These things were nerfed very significantly. He now moves slower but has a normal terror radius, and he has to aim for almost half a second, which gives survivors more time to react and you less time to quickly line up a shot. These were really bad changes for the Slinger, though he also had some slight buffs to compensate. His aiming down speed was increased slightly. He also has a shorter cooldown if you break the chain, which is nice, 1 less second. And some of his add-ons were buffed to compensate as well. Now, the add-on part is actually very significant because some of his add-ons right now are extremely powerful, and one of them in particular stands out. If you shoot a survivor further than 12 meters, one of his eerie add-ons can insta-down. This is easily his best add-on and can actually make any game completely a loss for survivors if one person goes down at the wrong time at the wrong place. So his add-on changes were actually really good. And on top of that, we now have had the generic killer buffs that happened some time ago. Faster pallet break-in, generator kick-in, shorter speed for survivors to run after being hit, and faster recovery from attacks. All are really, really good on Slinger, especially if you double down on the faster recovery, running Save the Best for Last, one of his best perks. The Slinger is now very uniquely capable of hitting a survivor, recovering and shooting, and then hitting them again in many places where before it was impossible. So all of these changes are great for Slinger, who has, I think, gone up a little bit. The fact that he has a weapon that he can shoot and real survivors with is really nice, because it helps him get downs almost anywhere, at least injuries almost anywhere, and downs in most loops as well. So not a lot of places are safe for him. So what are the worst things about Slinger? Why isn't he even stronger? His add-ons are fairly decent. His map adaptability is okay. The larger maps, when survivors split up, are a bit of a problem. Even if your 1v1 is very good, you're only 1 or 2 missed shots away from wasting too much time. And then you need to pick up, you need to hook, you need to reload, you need to walk across the map as a slower killer that doesn't have any particular info or stealth built into their kit. The slowdown that you have built into your kit is mending. If a survivor is hit by the chain, they have to mend. But this doesn't really go as well as other killers like Legion, because typically a survivor that you hit, you're going to commit to and down anyway, so they don't need to mend. So his slowdown and everything else is very limited. Survivors that have very strong items, that have very strong maps, will still be a bit of a problem. And if you miss shots and play badly, you will often just outplay yourself, which never feels great. But if you take advantage of his better perks, his better add-ons, and you play him tight and you're really, really good, you will make even good survivors very, very angry at the fact that they can't really lose you in chase, and any place they go is not quite safe. So when you consider all of that, Deathslinger is in a decent spot, but you definitely have to play him very, very well. And then we have Nemesis, a killer with many facets to him, many of which are frustrating. Right off the bat, his add-ons are some of the worst add-ons in the game. They focus on all of the things about his power that are inconsistent and bad, and almost no add-on whatsoever, there's only maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, does something consistently that is consistently useful. They're all situational, maybe if but type of add-ons. So that is a big limiting factor for Nemesis. His power mostly comes down in the form of the passive 2 zombies that spawn in the map and go around trying to harass survivors, and his tentacle and the damage that you can do with the tentacle. Now, zombies, right off the bat, are perhaps the worst part about him. They are very inconsistent. Every now and then, even good survivors will lose a game because one of them gets hit by a zombie, rarely. And oftentimes, you will have the zombies just do a little bit. They will bother survivors a little bit. They will make them waste a pallet a little bit. They will give you passive information a little bit, but nothing super remarkable. Many times, however, you will see zombies do nothing. They will scout parts of the map that are empty. They will get stuck on many places, and there's also a correlation. Some of the worst maps in the game for killer in general are also some of the worst maps in the game for zombies, because they get stuck on several small tiles. So it is very frustrating to play on a hard map where half your power doesn't work. So that part about Nemesis really hurts him. Unfortunately, the tentacle, fortunately, the tentacle is a different story. The tentacle is actually an amazing power. It starts out slow, and due to the nerfs that he received, you need to hit basically 2 survivors before it can really get going. But once you hit 2 survivors, or 1 survivor and a zombie and some other hits repeatedly, you get to tier 2. And in tier 2, the tentacle does what it does best. It infects survivors. If out of the infected, it damages them, and it shreds through pallets and breakable walls. Very important. This killer is the best killer in the game at breaking breakable walls and keeping up chase around them, which in many maps is a big deal. And he can also shred through pallets so quick that survivors are almost better off never dropping them and just taking the hit and going away. You will need to hit through survivors 3 times, which is a big of a deal, because the first infection with the tentacle doesn't do damage. They do get less speed than before, and all of those things are good. So benefiting from the shorter cooldowns and the slower gens and all of that is good, is a good thing for Nemi. But the 3 hits, you really need to know what you're doing. It might well be that you lose a game because you use your tentacle too little, or because you use your tentacle too much. And in this current patch, increasingly, it really is about balancing everything and finding that balance of, okay, I use my tentacle to get to tier 2, but now I hit because I don't want to waste time. And I use my tentacle because they're running out of vaccines, but now I use my M1 because I have insta-down. You really need to use your brain when playing Nemesis, because anything else will give you inconsistent bad results. But if you do, he is a decent killer. The only downside of which is just the fact that you have to hit survivors 3 times in chase. But otherwise, he is a menace, and even good survivors do get whipped by his tentacle almost anywhere, as long as you're close enough. So Nemesis is great, just held back by all of these things that we mentioned that are really, really unfortunate, and that I hope to see a change in sometime soon. And then we move on to the Dredge, who is also a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. He is a killer that does a lot of things and can be really, really scary, but ultimately doesn't exceed in any one of them to the point where he's super oppressive. Now, worth mentioning about the Dredge is that he is very loud. He produces a sound that is very easy for survivors to hear that doesn't seem like it's going to get patched anytime soon. And this makes all of the stealth from his perks, power, and anywhere else a bit bad. He's not very good at sneaking up on survivors, but he is good up until that last second at catching them off guard in any place of the map, because he has excellent mobility with his teleportation between lockers. This mobility is even better if it happens before these lockers are locked, and it's also even better during nighttime. You build up nighttime by hitting survivors, hooking them, keeping them injuring, and also while you are in the locker waiting, it builds up. All of these things can make nighttime happen fast, and it can be extended or even applied at the start with add-ons, which is really powerful. And during nighttime, the teleporting is so fast that you can actually use it in chase. On top of this ability to go around the map and choose and pick your battles carefully, which is awesome, and the little stealth and lack of visibility that survivors get during nightfall, the Dredge has a easy to use ability that lets him place a remnant, a shadow of himself that he can teleport back to. And he plays a little bit like a spirit or a nurse with the add-ons to call back. And many small loops, you can use this remnant to force hits or put survivors in a situation where they're going to get hit no matter what, or they need to go to the next one. Now, in the really bad maps, you will have loops on top of loops stacked next to other loops, and this ability isn't insane, but many places it is still useful, and some creative use of this ability is nice. In maps where survivors have a big boat or a big obstacle, you can also use it to turn a 15-second chase into a hit, into a 5-second chase into a hit. So that ability helps even outside of conventional looping, and is pretty nice. He also has nice synergy with insta-down perks and other perks of any kind due to his mobility and ability to attack with his basic power. So as I said, the Dredge is very versatile. The main downside, survivors will very quickly lock lockers and make your mobility feel clunky. They will very quickly heal if they have methods to do so, which they often will, because who doesn't want to bring 5 medkits per game, right? Needless to say, his power in chase is good, but it's not the best, and he's also highly susceptible to body blocking and even to sabotage, because survivors can run into your remnant, your little shadow, and make it disappear. So the moment survivors become aware of what you can do and body block a little bit for each other, do a bit of teamwork, the Dredge, it feels a little bit harder. Worth mentioning, though, is all kinds of unconventional strategies that have popped up and will probably continue to develop on the Dredge. Some players like to make survivors drop their items and play into chaos, and apparently that has some merit. Personally, I like to use auto-reading perks to see when survivors are going to lock lockers and then teleport there to grab them out of a locker, and this is moderately successful. If you manage to get a grab very early on, this is amazing, in fact. So yeah, the ability to do these crazy things and do things that are unexpected is a massive asset of his. I've also even been in games where I hide in a locker for 30 seconds just to make nightfall happen, and then I use the nightfall to go around the map until I hear a heartbeat, which is what happens when you have nightfall, to find survivors that I need to find. He also even has an add-on to make all of the survivors' auto reveal to you when you do all of the teleports. This is really good stuff. When you consider all of the things he has and all of the little add-ons and how they interact with each other, he is a bit of an unpredictable monster, which makes him, in my opinion, really, really fun to play and analyze. Ultimately, though, I don't think any of these are extremely OP, and that's what solidifies him as a very decent middle-of-the-board B-tier killer in my eyes. Another killer that comes next that is unfortunately not quite as dignified is the Hillbilly. Now, the Hillbilly is not in the middle because he's perfectly balanced in every way. In fact, he used to be for the longest time one of the strongest killers in the game, but he's just gone down and down and down since. The Hillbilly has a bit of mobility, which is always handy with his chainsaw, and this chainsaw also allows him to break pallets, walls faster than usual, if they're already dropped, obviously, and insta-down survivors, which is a very, very significant deal. Any killer that can insta-down survivors has a force to be reckoned with and can punish mistakes very quickly, even though it's not quite as ravenously punishing as Cannibal, who can hit multiple survivors. So Hillbilly in that regard has a very decent kit. However, what do his add-ons do? Not a lot. There are about 2 or 3 add-ons that are good that you need to look out for, and almost nothing else. Many add-ons that do very little or buff parts of him that don't need buffs, or that have useful effects that are just, as I said, too little to actually be noticeable. Mostly you're looking at the low pro chains to hit survivors when they drop pallets, which might as well be base kit in my opinion, and the engravings, which make his chainsaw much faster, which is harder for survivors to react to, but also make him harder to play because you need to pre-rev the chainsaw from earlier because it takes longer. So overall, his add-ons don't buff him super significantly, and in fact they almost feel like they should be base kit, some of them. And he is a killer that needs to be played with very high accuracy to get similar results to other killers that can be played with far less accuracy. So for you as a Cannibal, for you as a Hillbilly to perform as well as a Cannibal, you need to be orders of magnitude better than that Cannibal. And that feels pretty bad because anytime you make even the tiniest mistake, or survivors make even the tiniest outplay, you will be punished a lot. He is a killer that needs to be both played accurately, and you also need to guess accurately. So if a survivor goes around a structure and you try to curve around it, you need to both do the right inputs, but also predict where the survivor will go and already guess prematurely what you're going to do. There's a lot of mind games involved, and overall, if you play Billy at a very high level, he can be in this position or even higher. But you will ultimately be limited by the fact that many maps are just not designed for Billy anymore. There's tons of really strong windows that survivors can use and abuse. You're now playing against even more sprint bursts than before. You no longer have 4 dead cards in a lobby like you used to typically, which means that survivors are less likely to be caught in the open where the Hillbilly is the strongest. You now also have to, your ability to camp hooks in a pinch is also lessened by the fact that reassurance, deliverance, kinship, anti-camping perks now are more prominent. So it all comes down to the ability of you to get short chases, keep them short, and maybe snowball. And to be fair, in most maps, doing this is really difficult against decent survivors, just because you need to play so well and the survivors need to mess up so repeatedly. When you consider all of that and his overall pretty lacking add-ons, with his higher rarity add-ons being gimmicky or terror radius related things, I think Hillbilly has fallen a bit from grace. Needless to say, the fact that survivors make less distance after a hit doesn't benefit as much for a killer that should insta-down. So yeah, when you consider all of the changes, I think Hillbilly is unfortunately found in this low B tier, which is a bit of a sad thing to see, knowing how strong the Hillbilly and his add-ons used to be. And the next killer is the Trickster. Now, the Trickster is a ranged killer that comes with some inherent flaws that we can just lay out and discuss right away. As a ranged killer, you need good accuracy and some recoil control, which already makes him a little bit harder to play than some other killers. He also has bad mobility. He is slower than other killers and has to reload at lockers to refill his power. Not a huge deal, but it does hurt your ability to get around the map quickly and makes you more predictable and slow for survivors to keep up with you. Even though he has a smaller terror radius, he has a lullaby, much like Huntress. It works a bit differently, and it's not quite as easy to pick up for survivors, but it does hurt some potential that he would otherwise have to be a bit stealthier. So that part about him is a little bit unfortunate. He also has a timed ability when you use multiple knives and land multiple knives named the main event, which allows him to throw knives basically twice as fast. But this is timed and actually can trigger at times where you don't need it, which means that a part of his power can sometimes be wasted just due to bad management or bad luck. So all of those things suck, and it is bad. It is difficult for you to keep up in maps that are huge with bad lockers against survivors that run behind tall structures where your knives can't do much. Also, unlike killers like Wesker or Plague, using your power partially on a survivor is typically a bad idea. It's not like they get infected and the infection continues. If you shoot a lot of knives into a person and don't damage them, those knives immediately begin to disappear after about 15 seconds, give or take. And that's bad. It means you've wasted a lot of your power potentially for very little gain. So all of those things considered, Trickster is tough and difficult. But what can he actually bring to the table? Well, despite being a range killer, the Trickster's main strength comes from the fact that he is insanely powerful at shedding through survivor health state. Unlike almost any other killer in the game, he doesn't have a cooldown for damaging survivors. So if you throw a knife, you begin to throw them faster and faster as you go, and you injure a survivor, the survivor will get a speed boost, but you don't get slowed down. So it's actually very easy to down a survivor right after you have injured them if your knives are accurate enough. And that's what the Trickster is really good about. In a way, he's like Cannibal, where if you're caught in the open, you're going to die. And unlike Cannibal, if you drop a pallet in front of him, he can just shoot his knives over the pallet and still down you. So he is actually a huge menace in the open, and you should avoid that against him. If you catch survivors in the open or coming out of basement and so on, it is very difficult for them to get out of there without losing several health states. That being said, he is a killer that is very good at camping in a meta that heavily discourages and punishes camping right now with perks like Reassurance, Deliverance, Off the Record to prevent tunneling and so on. So in the past, a survivor unhooking in front of you, if you were fast enough, you could prevent it or even down them and then down the person they unhooked. Now, borrowed time being base kit, survivors all have endurance for at least 5 seconds, sometimes more with perks, and that means that you can no longer get free injuries on people off the hook or even prevent them from being unhooked as reliably as before. So the playstyle of defending hooks on Trickster is harder, and now you'll need to be more aggressive in the current meta. And unfortunately, perks like Corrupt Intervention or Ruin, which could have helped you in the past to keep up the aggressive playstyle, are now slightly or significantly worse than before. So when you consider that, Trickster's playstyle is a bit difficult to enforce. Not to mention that indoor maps with lots of buildings that break line of sight are difficult for him. You don't catch up quickly around corners, and you don't shoot through corners. Now, let's consider, however, the fact that some of his add-ons are actually pretty damn powerful and fairly unique. Trickster mains often try to specialize in a few add-ons, and they get really good at using some of them. And they can make up for many of his shortcomings. With the Hardcade shoes, you can keep up and throw knives at survivors more consistently around tall structures. Some people get good at using bouncy blades to hit survivors around corners. His iridescence can help his efficiency or even make him insta-down, which is really, really scary. If survivors are caught in the open, not only do you down them, but you also save a lot of ammo. So there's quite a lot of potential in his add-ons that actually make him a little bit stronger than you sometimes would expect without them. So that's nice on him. However, when you consider the fact that survivors can just split up, that some of the worst maps are just big maps where lockers are hard to catch, and that the survivor meta now discourages camping, which is something that he was uniquely good at, I think Trickster just brings himself down a notch and is now a proud #1 C tier killer. But yeah, that's mostly all there is to him. We then move on to Doctor, a killer that has so many faces and so many things to him that are really hard to narrow down. He's a killer that has built-in information gathering. With add-ons, he has a lot of side effects, all of which are at least decent and some of which can be really powerful. He can also deny the usage of items. If you suspect that a survivor has a very strong medkit, you can always put them into tier 3 by repeatedly shocking them, and now they can't use it. Same with flashlights, same with anything else. And this can also affect them in other ways. If you put a survivor minus tier 3, they cannot pick up other survivors from the ground, for example. So smart usage of your madness on survivors is super, super important. And smart usage of his better add-ons is also really, really important on Doctor. Now, at its core, Doctor is an M1 basic attack style killer that has to catch up to you and hit you. Yes, Dead Hard has been nerfed. You used to be able to Dead Hard through his shock, which was very annoying, which means that even if you were in a bad spot, you could just press E and then dodge his shock. You can no longer do that, so Doctor is much, much better against the current Dead Hard, but the other exhaustion perks are still very usable against him. On top of that, the killer buffs that all killers got, the generic killer buffs, benefit Doctor immensely. Shorter cooldown is great, shorter distances is great, longer generators benefits him, and he has a unique synergy with skill check perks and other specific perks that is very difficult for other killers to match. So with Doctor, you can actually make Merciless Storm, an otherwise okay perk, into an absolute lunatic level slowdown perk that makes survivors basically have to spend 20 extra seconds on each gen, which is huge. So you have that. You also have Deathman Switch and Pain Rest, which are easy for him to use. Save the Best for Last, great perk, amazingly useful on Doctor. You can also kick people out of gens and then pick up with Thrilling Tremors to block such gens. There are a lot of combinations on Doctor that work out really, really well. And if you are creative, his add-ons allow for a variety of different playstyles. So you could be strong and unpredictable in many, many ways. Ultimately, however, you still are a killer that doesn't have any insane mobility and that is limited to chasing survivors one at a time and hitting them and so on, with no built-in insane mobility or insta-down, which means that you are susceptible to body blocks, you are susceptible to very quick heals and clutch perks, giving survivors second chances and so on. So that is unfortunately something that just limits the Doctor and limits most of the killers coming after the Doctor to a higher tier than that. It will come down to survivors playing smart, splitting up when they need to, using their exhaustion perks like Sprint Burst well so that you don't get a first nice hit on them. And now your Doctor is a much less intimidating character. Still, however, has a really nice consistency, has a really nice ability to synergize with perks that are rare for other killers, and is otherwise a character that survivors hate to verse, so you should definitely play Doctor. And talking about killers that survivors apparently hate to verse, we reach the Legion, a bunch of killers that have also gone up and down significantly over the years. As of the most recent patch, Legion is a decent character. They still have an unmatched ability to catch up to survivors, injure them, and then do this on successive survivors. So survivors grouping up basically invites Legion to quickly go from one to another and injure all of them. This also inflicts deep wound, which means that even good medkits are not as effective. You cannot just get injured and heal. You first have to mend, and there are now some add-ons to make mending inflict different status effects if survivors don't mend each other, which means they have to get together, which means you get to do it again. And on top of that, if you hit a fourth survivor with your power, the fifth hit that you do can insta-down. In some maps, in some instances, survivors, especially depending on your add-ons and how smart you are at identifying such situations, the Legion can hit 1, 2, 3, 4, and then hit the same survivor or another a fifth time to instantly down them, which is an insanely powerful ability to have when it comes to it. Survivors that are smart will not fall for this. First of all, they will split up, or if it's a big map, they don't even have to, you'll never catch them. And they also can body block for each other and make you hit the person that has already been hit, which destroys your power and makes it reset. When you consider that, yeah, this is a nice ability that will punish survivors that are careless or that are not very organized, but it's not a massive ability that you can do every match in every map against every kind of survivor. Certainly not. But still, nice ability to have. So for the most part, Legion is very good at injuring and keeping survivors injured. But what happens once they're injured? What do you do? Well, you're a basic killer with no special power for the most part that just needs to go around and play normal M1 killer things and basic normal killer stuff and get down and get rid of pallets. Now, Thunderophobia was a very popular perk that for a little while was really strong. They nerfed it back into being almost irrelevant. I don't recommend it. So now you need to look for perks that are a little bit smarter and have a bit more synergy. Luckily, with Legion, you can still make many things work. Jolt, Pain Rest, discordance, all of these information and regression perks work just fine on them, and even some off-meta perks can also work fine on them. So your strategy is very simple. The problem will come, of course, when survivors have healing methods that are so good that even you can keep up with them if they split up, and when survivors are so comfortable being injured that once you've already injured them all, now you can't down a single one of them in a timely manner. Map selection matters a lot for Legion, and unfortunately many big maps just don't help your ability to keep many survivors injured at a time. So when you consider all of that, yeah, he's not quite as strong. One thing in their favor, however, is the fact that if you hit a survivor with your power, they can't use Dead Heart, so he's almost immune to it, and they also cannot use Off the Record or other endurance perks. So Legion can, in a way, play around some of the endurance perks, which is nice. However, one of his main strengths of being able to injure the whole team and then camp someone to second stage and so on is now going to be a little bit harder than before, because remember, Reassurance is going to be a strong perk that will make camping tricky. So you want to be good at really closing each chase and getting hooks and getting people down on hook rather than expect survivors to mess up and give you a free camp, because those situations will be increasingly difficult for you to achieve. When you consider all of that, I think Legion sits okay in this spot. If it wasn't for average teams that play badly, that don't have a lot of resources, I think Legion would even be lower than this. But as it stands, I think this is a good spot. We then move on to Ghostface. Ghostface is very different from Legion. He doesn't want to get everyone injured and try to keep them injured and then pick them up one by one. That is a playstyle that can fail very, very quickly on him. Even though he's a decent stealth killer, your strength on Ghostface comes from the fact that you can insta-down survivors if you catch them off guard, or threaten to insta-down them later. So you can stalk a survivor to 90, let's say 99%, and that survivor is kind of useless for the team. They cannot quickly come and rescue you because they could go down. And they also need to keep their guard up because they won't be able to run you for very long if you catch them in a bad spot. So the Ghostface's main strengths come from the fact that he has one of the best, simplest stealths in the game. His early game is completely unannounced. Unlike other stealth killers, he doesn't have any props or HUD elements that give him away. So at the start, it is perfectly possible for a Ghostface to get a grab or mark a survivor or mark multiple survivors and get an insta-down or do an insta-down shortly after. So his early game is very, very good compared to other killers, which is awesome. And then he has the threat of being able to mark survivors, sometimes without their knowledge, and threaten to down them later. And his add-ons feed into this unpredictability. We have add-ons that make it so that downing a survivor gives you your power back, add-ons to make gens regress if you stalk someone on them, add-ons to make the recovery or the stalking meter easier to proc. Really good add-ons all across, some of which are difficult to use. So Ghostface, unlike some of the killers around him, is actually a very tricky killer to pull off. You can miss an attack and lose a game, or hit an attack right, insta on a person, and win the game right there and then. He is a killer that is very easy to blunder with and very punishing if you blunder. So he needs to be played very, very surgically and very, very accurately. And that is a bit of a turnoff for some people. As I mentioned, his add-ons overall are strong, with some of them standing out and allowing you to do things that might catch survivors off guard, like getting your power back or being unable to be revealed by someone that you just down. So there are a few things that really elevate him, and good Ghostface players will learn spots in different maps that give weird, unusual stalking angles. So a good Ghostface might know that if they go to the second floor, they actually can go through here and look through this window that looks through this fence and stalk two survivors at once. They will also constantly 99 people, and the less aware teams can fail spectacularly when this happens. You can have a very confident Meg common body block, completely unaware that she's insta-downable, and then you just pop and down her immediately. So he is a killer that can really make a number of less coordinated teams. However, What happens when teams are coordinated? What happens when you get revealed? When survivors that are marked get body blocks? When survivors just run you really well? Well, you have a crouching, you have some stealth, but you don't have any real chasing power. Some exceptions aside, unless it comes from some add-ons or some perks. So you are a killer that can be run out for a very long time, that doesn't have a great time in very open maps where you can be spotted, where windows and pallets that are well connected will hurt you. And yeah, overall communication and good teamwork will make playing Ghostface a little bit tough. But yeah, if you're ready for that challenge, play Ghostface, you will highly, highly enjoy him. And after that, we move on to the Pig. And the Pig is a killer that in the past has been very close to the bottom spots. Her early game is very weak, and she has a bit of the syndrome of jack of all trades but master of none. She can crouch slowly and become stealthily slowly, which gives her a bit of a subpar stealth. When she's crouched, she can use her ambush to quickly dash forward. It's not the best chasing power in the game, so it's a bit of a subpar but acceptable chase tool. And on top of that, she used to have slowdown to put traps on survivors and they could remove them, and it was somewhat random. So she had some slowdown, but it was also not very consistent. Now, two of these things haven't changed. She's still a subpar stealth killer, and she still has a somewhat subpar chase power. But her passive slowdown has been reworked in one of the previous patches, and this elevates her very significantly. Yes, you have a slow early game. Yes, you're not incredible in chase, but what happens when you down a survivor? Well, in the past, it could be that you put a trap on them, a reverse bear trap on them, and then they remove it on the first try. And then you work really hard, you get another survivor down, and then they also remove it on first try. And then the third guy also removes it on first try. It was complete randomness, and it was very bad. And on top of that, her add-ons used to be really weak. But then her add-ons got buffed, and now she has a bunch of add-ons to really challenge survivors in some ways. And more recently still, her RNG to her traps was altered, and now it's semi-fixed. Survivors don't have a 1 in 4 anymore. You cannot have survivors remove the traps, all of them at the first search. Instead, they have 12 searches, more with add-ons, that they all have to do. So if one survivor removes their trap on their first try, then that means that the other guys will need to do 3, 4, and 4 searches. And this is very significant. In small maps, the Pig can actually bully survivors while they search and basically turn the game into a 3v1 that can very quickly turn into an actual 3v1 if one of the survivors messes up. So this is scary. This is very scary for survivors. They need to play it well. In larger maps that are typically worse for Pig, this is sometimes even worse for survivors because the boxes can be so far apart that if you get bothered just a little bit, or if you spend too much time healing, now you literally don't have time to remove the box if the Pig is running certain add-ons. And trust me, there's no reason for the Pig not to run these add-ons. So if the Pig runs delay and head-popping add-ons, and you go to a certain map, survivors have a very high chance, when you add all of it up, to have 1 or 2 people die or almost die from their traps. So, and that's with her bothering you very little or not at all. So when you consider that, it is actually really scary. On top of that passive slowdown that she gets, there's nothing stopping her from having actual slowdown perks like Corrupt, Deadlock, No Way Out, and all the jazz, or even other chase perks like Say the Best for Last to make it really difficult for survivors to take hits for each other and so on. So her slowdown paired with add-ons, I think, is very strong and even lethal in some cases, which elevates her very, very significantly and makes her, I think, a really scary killer. However, if you assume that survivors give you a very difficult early game, if you're not running any add-ons or any of the strong add-ons, then she's a perfectly average character, and I would easily drop her down to D tier because her early game is bad. She is a normal M1 character that is easy to heal quickly against, that is easy to body block against, that is easy to loop, that is easy to pre-drop pallets against, which renders her ambush less powerful. A stealth that requires perks to be effective or add-ons to really know what you're doing, and that is subpar. The fact that she's a stealth killer, but survivors can see the boxes at the start so they know to expect her. All of those things, yeah, make her a pretty average killer if it wasn't for the things that we just described. So yeah, that's what justifies her position here. And yeah, go try it for yourself. Run some of those really strong purple add-ons, put traps on everyone. As long as you don't play against survivors that are gods that keep you in chase for 4 gens, you will see results. We now move on to the Wraith. And the Wraith is a killer with a lot of incremental things. He doesn't exceed in one area particularly, but all of the little things that he's good at add up to something that can be quite powerful. For starters, he's a killer with decent stealth that doesn't announce itself. So unlike Sadako or the pig, when you start the game, they shouldn't know that you're a Wraith, and that means that you can get a good ambush surprise attack going at the start. And then he has a few tools in terms of add-ons and perks to make his chases a little bit unpredictable. He can see where survivors are with certain add-ons and perks. He can find which gens are being done with certain add-ons and perks. He can break pallets and block windows with add-ons and perks. He has a few little things that can make him a bit quirky and a bit unexpected and a bit difficult for some survivors to last against very long. If these things fail, or if the Wraith is not very skilled at applying them, he's a pretty basic killer with no crazy chase power or anything like that. You can even burn him out of his cloaking with flashlights, which makes flashlights a strong item that is otherwise not that powerful to bring in a match. But conversely, there's also a lot of little tricks that Wraiths can do. They can hit you, cloak, and catch up. They can cloak and get ahead of you and body block certain structures to prevent you passage. As I said, a lot of the little tricks and add-ons can make him unpredictable in chase. You can have a killer that can see you through walls with a certain purple add-on, which makes it very impossible for survivors to pull off any kind of mind game. So yeah, all of those things are really, really powerful. The fact that he has decent mobility makes even large maps a little bit easier to deal with. You don't spend that much time going to point A, from point A to point B. The time that you spend between chases is also very short. You typically hook a survivor, become stealthy, and find someone else fast because you're so quick and stealthy. You don't have to spend a lot of time looking for survivors typically, which is awesome. But it just comes down to how much resistance survivors have to going down. The typical body blocks, strong healing, and so on is a bit of a counter that Wraith just cannot, unfortunately, push against really, really hard. But yeah, in summary, Wraith is really good at ambushes and doing some tricky things, but the more the survivors become aware and they really start to use their perks against you and force you to hit them multiple times with off the record and so on, each time that you need to hit them additionally becomes harder and harder and harder if they wisen up a little bit. So he can get a bit difficult, but still, you still have a lot of little things helping you out. We then move on to the Clown, and the Clown, unlike some of the other killers, is very, very simple. You have a killer that is almost the personification of a basic attack M1 killer. No crazy mobility, no crazy teleporting, no crazy nothing. He just has a knife and he hits you with it. He also throws bottles. These bottles can slow down survivors or speed you or the survivors up if they step on it. Now, these bottles are actually a really good resource. They are very, very powerful, and they make small, unsafe loops into completely unsafe loops altogether. The somewhat unsafe loops that are more or less balanced, the Clown quickly tips into his advantage, so a survivor on a TL wall will not get one loop around it if you play it well. He will get hit. And then the stronger loops that typically have pallets, yeah, the Clown's bottle doesn't do anything around these, so typically you want to slow them down, break the pallet really quickly. Sometimes you can even slow them down while you break it, and then catch up quickly. So he has a method to make weak loops very weak and strong loops not so strong and quickly dealt with. That level of consistency in chase is something that other killers simply do not have. It doesn't matter if you are the best Ghostface in the world. If a survivor has two windows next to each other and they are too strong, you just can never do anything about it, no matter how good you are at the game if you don't have any extra help. Meanwhile, Clown can turn even some very strong structures into places where he can reliably get hits. And if you're smart and use your yellow bottles effectively, you can definitely get hits even in places where survivors don't quite think they'll get hit at. On top of that, he also has some notable add-ons that are decent. Some auto-reading add-ons that can really catch survivors off guard. One particular powerful insta-down add-on that needs to be played a certain way, but that can be really, really nasty and difficult for survivors to play around. And a bunch of other utility add-ons that complement some playstyles. All in all, decent killer in chase that can close down chases nicely and has predictable ways to close down a chase, but that ultimately has no insane mobility, no built-in insta-down or anything like that for the most part. And that means that if survivors split up and you're chasing one of them in one corner of the map, there is very little you can do about the other three split up on other generators across the map. You will down the survivor, you will carry them very slowly, you will reload your bottles very slowly, and now half the gens of the match are done, and there's not much you can do about that. That is his main problem. He doesn't have a big presence on the map or a way to slow down survivors across the board. You need your perks to help you do your damnedest to stop that. And yeah, that's ultimately it. He used to be very, very good in certain situations where unhooks were concerned. He used to be able to hit survivors through BT and some other things like that, but with off the record, with almost instant healing things and other things like that, all of this playstyle, I think, is a little bit harder to do than before. Body blocks are, coming in full force, more people running adrenaline. The survivors that you're not bothering, you're not a killer that can bother multiple survivors. The survivors that you're not bothering are going to be sitting on gens together with Prove Thyself. And these things ultimately hurt the clown's abilities. Moving on, we reach the Nightmare, aka Freddy. And the Nightmare is a bit of a weird cookie. He has the characteristics mostly of a normal M1 basic killer. Normal speed, normal terror radius, all the jazz. But then he has a power that has some level of complexity to it. Basically, survivors begin the game as awake and they fall asleep every minute. They can sometimes fall asleep faster if they get hit or if a certain add-on is used, or even slower if they use clocks to stay awake or snap each other out of sleep. So survivors need to passively waste a little bit of time, not too much, but a little bit of time to stay awake. If they stay awake, Freddy's teleport ability is slower and doesn't recover as fast, and they are completely immune to his snares and his pallets. If they are asleep, however, the recovery is faster. He can teleport more frequently, which is a big part of his power, and he can use the snares and the pallets. Now, the pallets can fool some teams and can be really fun, but they are mostly inferior to the snares. The snares are actually a fairly decent chasing power that can make some loops basically free hits if survivors don't play a certain way, and can force pallets to be dropped really quickly. A bit similar to Clown. But remember, unlike Clown, Freddy cannot use his power freely. Survivors need to fall asleep first. So if they manage their sleeping schedule well enough, you as a Freddy need to chase the right person and need to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, he's still a basic attack killer that you can body block against and do all of these things with wake up, heal fast again. So he is a bit basic in that regard. If that was all of his power, he really wouldn't be shining very much at all. Don't forget, he only has one very decent add-on and everything else is very bad by comparison. His add-on, the paintbrush, to keep all the survivors asleep at the start and make them harder to wake up, that add-on is great. But almost anything else is very situational or does very little in terms of actual effectiveness. And yeah, his add-ons are, for the most part, really, really bad. So you want instead to use your teleport to make great use of your perks. And that is the real strength of Freddy. Freddy is very good at using slowdown perks and applying slowdown perks on generators across the board. With a killer like Clown that we just discussed, you can chase a survivor into a corner, down them at the corner, hook them in the corner, and now the gens across the map are being lost. With Freddy, you can block gens by teleporting to them with certain perks. You can hook a survivor in the middle of nowhere and then appear right next to a generator on the other side of the map and kick it with Pop Goes the Weasel, or block it with Deadman Switch, or apply Pain Resonance to it and teleport to it. There are a lot of things you can do with Freddy in terms of perks that make gens really hard to complete. And he is a killer that is very volatile around these perks. If you chase survivors that are gods at the game and don't give you downs, the gens will be slowly done in the background, you will lose. And he is a very mediocre character in that regard. If you watch a Freddy in a tournament, they will be lucky to get 2 hooks and lucky to get one kill. It can be really rough. But in real life, survivors don't play like a tournament. They go down. And when they go down, then you hook them, then you teleport, and you use all of these perks that typically happen after hooks to make gens very difficult to complete. And in that regard, Freddy's pretty great, because even bad maps that are really big can actually turn against survivors, since they now need to traverse it while he himself is teleporting relatively fast. So in some ways, Freddy can play around bad maps and use strong regression perks to their almost full extent. In any other regard, though, he's pretty mediocre, and survivors that learn how to play as a team and learn how to loop well individually will quickly kick his ass. And that's pretty much it for Freddy. Let's move on to the next one. And right after Freddy comes another licensed movie superstar, Myers, the Shape. And in many ways, he is one of the worst. In many ways, let's just say it straight, he's the worst killer in the game. He starts the game being undetectable, much like Ghostface, but unlike Ghostface, he cannot quickly spring into action. He starts in Tier 1 Evil Within, where he is slower than survivors, cannot insta-down, doesn't have any special property other than being undetectable, and he needs to stalk survivors, look at them for a very long time to get into Tier 2, where he becomes a more normal killer, albeit with smaller terror radius and some other modifiers. So at the start of the game, for Myers, it is imperative, no matter what build you're running pretty much, to get into Tier 2. So a good game with Ghostface would be to start and get a grab or get a down. A good game with Wraith would be to start and get a hit. A good match with Myers is to start and get to Tier 2, which doesn't give you an injury, doesn't give you a down, doesn't give you anything. It just allows you to play the game. Myers starts out weaker than other killers and needs to waste time around potentially difficult structures just to be able to play the other way killers can. With very limited exceptions, this sets him back a lot and makes his early game one of the worst in the game. Now, to make up for this though, in Tier 2, he does have some advantages. Slightly faster vaulting speed is nice, slightly smaller terror radius is sweet in some maps that are not super big. And then when he gets to Tier 3, he has a temporary, typically around 1 minute duration, part of the game where he can insta-down. And he vaults even faster and has an even bigger terror radius. And this is pretty good. Insta-downing, even if it's limited, is a pretty big deal. But here's the deal, right? How many times are you going to be able to do this? How much do you have to give up to get to this point? You have to give up quite a lot. Unless survivors play really stupid, and some of them do, you have to give up quite a lot to get to that Tier 3. And then you will down one survivor, you will put them on the hook, wasting your time. And then if you try to camp him, it's now entirely possible that you will run out of your Tier 3, even with add-ons, if survivors have anti-camping perks like Reassurance. So if you hook a survivor and you go out and you find no one, they might just hide and then rescue that survivor when your Tier 3 has expired, which is terrible, really, really bad for you. If you try to go for multiple survivors, you have a killer that doesn't have any insane chase power, and it's very possible that the second survivor that you chase, assuming that the first one you caught made it easy, makes it much, much harder for you. So when you consider the fact that he's not nearly as good as camping as before because of the more prevalent and powerful anti-camping perks like Reassurance, his Tier 3 loses quite a lot of value. Now, that being said, there are a few things that elevate him very, very considerably that you have to take into account. And this is why he's not the worst killer in the game, which he otherwise would be. There are a few add-ons, and one of them sticks out in particular, that make his power much more threatening. He has an add-on to give him infinite Tier 3, which is not as powerful as it seems, but it's still good. And then, most notably, the Tombstone Fragment, the purple add-on that lets him kill, murder, Mori, healthy survivors in Tier 3. Yes, he does take longer to get there, a bit longer, and he does lose Tier 3 if he does this, but this is still insane. This add-on single-handedly makes Myers so much better, and if I only judge him on this add-on, then I would put him, much, much higher on the tier list. When you consider all of the other ones, he definitely belongs here, but this add-on alone is disgusting, and I've played countless games where even survivors play relatively well, they often don't expect it. At 3 or 4 gens, I find one of them, I stab them, and they die. And even if I'm a mediocre killer, I'm a mediocre killer against 3 other survivors. And I can even do that again near the endgame. Yeah, These add-ons, and this one in particular, just makes him really stupid. One day, maybe this add-on will be changed, maybe he will be swapped. The devs have said that they're not doing this anytime soon, so I really don't know what to expect. As it is right now, he's a really bad killer with very little going for him other than these extremely singular add-ons making him more powerful than he has any right to be. So yeah, that's Myers in a nutshell. And now we move over to Sadako. Now, Sadako, aka the Onryo, is an interesting killer. She is stealthy, but unlike Ghostface, she has a visual indicator that survivors can pick up at the start of the game. At the start of the game, survivors will see that their portraits have a black outline, which immediately tells them that they're playing against a Sadako. And this is really bad because she is fairly stealthy. If she's the manifested, she's not fast like the Wraith, and she has a bit of a sound lullaby that acute survivors can hear, but she is otherwise pretty stealthy. A survivor that's not paying a lot of attention can easily be crept up by Sadako. But if they pay attention to the HUD, this will never happen. When you creep up to a survivor, you can sometimes get a hit, you can sometimes get a quick pallet drop. After a few seconds, an assortment of televisions pop up during the map and they turn on after a few seconds, and you can then teleport through these TVs, which gives you a bit of mobility. Very oddly, using your televisions gives you a 100-second cooldown per television. So teleporting has a big cooldown unless you run one of her best add-ons on the TVs, which is really bad. Survivors are meant to disable these TVs, but that disabling of the TV has less of a cooldown than your own teleporting. So it's actually really bad for survivors to touch TVs. In fact, one of her most effective gameplay elements is tunneling a survivor that has a tape on their hand and killing them. You can do this with certain add-ons or try to come up with this on the fly during normal matches. And tunneling a survivor with a tape on their hand is similar to how the pig can tunnel a person with a head trap on their head. They can't really use it and get rid of it if you're on top of them, though it's a little bit easier against Sadako, unless they have some mad teamwork. So I've actually seen Sadakos play very effectively and dominate even organized teams by harassing one person with a tape and getting them killed by building up the condemned, which is interesting. Now, this is fascinating and definitely makes Sadako somewhat scary, but there's two things to consider. Number one, this is very difficult. You need to run certain add-ons or lull survivors into a false sense of security and induce them into making a mistake and then take advantage of the mistake. This is difficult. This is very, very difficult. It's not easy to make this thing happen, and you need to play a certain way, and you could lose the game trying to do this. And it's hard to make it consistently. But it's something that can really turn a game around. You can sometimes mori with your condemn a person at 4 gens, which is huge, right? Not that different from Myers with a purple tombstone. But the other thing that is maybe worth talking about more is that it requires a level of precision and effort that you could have just put into something else. When I see a really strong Sadako player do 300 IQ plays into condemning a player, and it takes 2 minutes, I think to myself, well, maybe a Nemesis could have just done the same by just tunneling the person with the tentacle, or maybe a Huntress could have done. Other killers can do more with less effort and can get more out of lazy gameplay than Sadako can by playing extremely well. And out of these add-ons to make everyone start with the tape, and a couple add-ons here and there, her add-ons overall are really mediocre. And at the end of the day, after her, if her stealth fails and if her plans to harass people with a tape fail, and they often will if you don't really go out of your way to go all in on this, she is a normal killer that you can mostly body block against, not entirely, but mostly, that you can heal very quickly against, that you can call out to your teammates, that you can just pin down to one location and more or less expect when she can come from, that you can even sometimes do smart plays against, like turning off TVs near the endgame to prevent her from teleporting to gates and so on, that you can play around really normally. If you go to a bad map with bad loops that are typically bad for basic killers and survivors play well and they have a couple medkits to make up for some mistakes, Sadako is just difficult. And ultimately, I think that for the effort required to make her work, I think she's just far less impressive than other characters. But as a very explosive character that can go around the map, I can totally see arguments from people that place her higher. It's just from my experience, when you consider the very limited usefulness of her add-ons and overall everything, I think she belongs down here. And talking about another tragic tale is perhaps the worst killer in the game right now, the Trapper. So the Trapper has the sad honor of joining Myers in the bad early game club. In fact, it's probably the killer with the worst early game. There's one purple add-on which has its own downsides, but it's probably one of his best, that makes him start with all of his traps. But if you don't run this one particular add-on, the Trapper's traps spawn around the map, everywhere, potentially in very far away corners where you need to waste a lot of time to get to or just give up on them. So your power would either not be complete if you don't pick all of them up, or will take you a very long time to even get it going. Once you get it going and you place a trap on the ground, you'll find that most of the reworked and new maps have zero grass or very little grass that is very easy for survivors to see through. So you might have survivors that call you out, you might have survivors that see the trap and just react to it, and you might have survivors that have a map and can find them, which is rare, but it's still a counter. You can find Trapper's traps with maps, which is crazy. Now, one big thing that has happened to Trapper is the fact that he no longer has to worry about dead hearts. Dead hearts now don't give iframes to survivors. Survivors used to be able to go right through a trap on a pallet by using dead heart, and that's not a thing anymore, which thank God. But he now has to worry about extra health states. Survivors can go on a trap, and if you hit them, they can escape with off the record. And if you grab them, they can hit you with decisive strike. Unlike other killers, you don't have a real way to catch up, so have fun doing that. Body blocking against him is fine. Calling out his traps is viable. Adrenaline, prove thyself, deliverance, all of these team perks that used to be a bit more rare are now in the front of survivor meta perks. And they all hurt the Trapper tremendously. You much would have rather gone against 4 Iron Wills that don't really matter so much for Trapper when he's an area control killer than 4 Adrenalines or Prove Thyself, Deliverance, Adrenaline, and all of these perks that can be unpredictable and give survivors a second win when you really don't want them to. Even though the generic killer buffs, longer gens, shorter speed boost from hits are all fine and welcome for Trapper, he, for the most part, cannot handle the items that survivors bring. Survivors don't want to quickly get injured and overrun by nurses, so they bring medkits. They don't want to be slowed down to oblivion by lesion, so they bring toolboxes. And all of these things, almost all of them invariably hurt the Trapper the most. So, what does it come down to being a Trapper? Being a Trapper basically boils down to setting up very little at the start, trying to use the purple add-on or the best possible path to waste the least amount of time, sometimes giving up hooks and chases at the start, and then trap the few problematic areas and hope the survivors either make a big mistake where all of them go down immediately, or put themselves in basement or some other really difficult place to get out of. And in those situations, Trapper, make no mistake, is very powerful. You can be in places where Trapper can essentially lock down a shack basement and make it almost impossible for anyone to get in. However, do consider the fact that in the next update, Deliverance, Reassurance, Adrenaline, all of these perks that punish you for camping or that give survivors a second win when they get unhooked are going to come in full force. And you as a Trapper you have some of the worst ways to be equipped against that. With all of that in mind, I reckon the Trapper is possibly the worst killer in the game right now. As long as survivors are smart and don't walk through grass out of chase for no reason, I think really Trapper should have one of the hardest time keeping up with them. But if that doesn't sit right with you and you have better ideas as to how this tier list really should fall into place, I'm genuinely all ears. I want to hear all about it in the comment section down below, because it might be that when the patch drops, I've missed something, or that I missed something critical that it would be nice to hear about. Honestly, even looking at this tier list, I can disagree with myself because some of these killers are so close, or they have so many things going for them. So yeah, thanks so much for watching. If you've watched through all of it, you really must have found something that I'm saying here fun or entertaining. So it really means a lot that you watched so far. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.